The story of Esther saving her people. In the grand city of Susa, where ancient walls rose like golden mountains against the Persian sky, a story of courage and destiny began to unfold. The air was sweet with the scent of flowering gardens, and fountains sang gentle songs in courtyards lined with polished marble. Here, in the heart of the vast Persian Empire, lived a young Jewish woman named Hadassah, though she would come to be known as Esther. Esther grew up under the loving care of her cousin Mordecai, who raised her as his own daughter after her parents passed into peaceful rest. Their days were filled with quiet devotion and wisdom, as Mordecai taught her the ancient ways of their people. Each evening, as the sun painted the city walls in shades of amber and rose, they would share stories of their heritage and pray together. In those days, King Ahasuerus ruled over an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia, vast as the starry expanse of night. The king resided in the palace of Susa, where halls of alabaster and gold caught the sunlight like captured dawn. Gardens cascaded in terraces, filled with the music of birds and the whisper of palm fronds in the warm breeze. When the palace began its search for a new queen, young women from across the empire were brought to the royal court. Esther, with her gentle grace and quiet wisdom, was among them. Mordecai advised her to keep her Jewish heritage private for the time being, like a precious seed waiting for the right season to bloom. Each day, he would walk near the courtyard where the women stayed, his heart full of prayer for his beloved cousin. In the palace, Esther found favor with Haggai, the keeper of the women. There was something about her presence that brought peace to those around her, like evening dew settling softly on garden flowers. She moved through her days with grace and humility, never seeking attention, yet drawing admiration like a lamp drawing moths in the gentle night. As the seasons turned like pages in an ancient book, Esther prepared for her audience with the king. She asked for nothing beyond what Haggai advised, trusting in divine guidance rather than earthly adornments. Her beauty flowed from an inner wellspring of wisdom and kindness, touching hearts more deeply than any jewels or costly garments could. When Esther was finally brought before King Ahasuerus, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of one who knows they walk in divine purpose. The king was moved by her presence, finding in her eyes a depth of wisdom that spoke to his heart. Like a star rising in the evening sky, Esther soon found herself elevated to the position of queen, though she held this honor with humble grace. Life in the palace flowed like a gentle stream, each day bringing new responsibilities that Esther met with quiet strength. She maintained her connection to Mordecai, who continued his faithful vigil near the palace gates. Through careful messages carried like leaves on the wind, they kept their bond strong while maintaining the secret of her heritage. It was during this time that Mordecai overheard whispers of danger, plots against the king floating like shadows in the palace corridors. Through Esther, he was able to warn the king, and the truth of his loyalty was recorded in the royal chronicles, though no immediate reward was given. Like seeds planted in winter soil, this act of faithfulness would later bloom in its proper season. But shadows began to deepen across the empire as Haman, a noble of proud bearing, rose to power beside the king. The air grew heavy with tension as Haman required all to bow before him. Mordecai, faithful to his beliefs, could not bring himself to bow, his devotion to the one true God standing firm like an ancient cedar in the wind. Haman's anger at this perceived slight grew like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. In his pride, he crafted a plan not just to harm Mordecai, but to remove all Jewish people from the empire. Through careful words and subtle suggestions, he obtained the king's permission to issue a decree. The message spread across the provinces like autumn leaves scattered by a cold wind, bringing fear and sorrow to Jewish communities throughout the land. When word of this decree reached Mordecai, he put on sackcloth and went into the city, his heart heavy, but his faith unwavering. His grief was like quiet rain falling on parched earth, visible to all who passed by. Through careful messages, he shared the news with Esther, helping her understand that perhaps she had been placed in the palace for such a time as this. In the quiet of her royal chambers, Esther received Mordecai words like precious stones dropping into still waters. She understood the gravity of what she must do. Approaching the king unbidden could mean death. Yet remaining silent would mean the loss of her people. Like a garden gathering strength before spring, she prepared herself through prayer and fasting. Esther sent word to Mordecai, asking all the Jewish people in Susa to join her in 3 days of fasting. Throughout the city, prayers rose like morning mist, carrying hopes and fears heavenward. In homes and gathering places, people turned their hearts toward heaven, their unity bringing comfort in the shadow of uncertainty. On the 3rd day, Esther adorned herself with royal robes, her outward beauty reflecting the inner strength that had grown through days of spiritual preparation. Like dawn breaking over distant mountains, she walked with quiet grace through the palace corridors toward the king's inner court. Her heart beat steady with purpose, each step carried by faith rather than fear. The king, seeing Esther standing in the court like a flower blooming in unexpected places, extended his golden scepter toward her. The simple gesture fell like gentle rain, bringing relief to all who witnessed it. With wisdom beyond her years, Esther did not immediately present her petition, but instead invited the king and Haman to a special banquet. In her private gardens, where fountains played soft melodies and flowers nodded in the breeze, Esther prepared the first feast. The afternoon light filtered through swaying branches, casting peaceful patterns across the gathering. Yet even as she served with gracious hospitality, her heart held the weight of her people's future like precious cargo on a vast sea. That night, as stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance, the king found himself unable to sleep. Like one led by an unseen hand, he asked for the royal chronicles to be read to him. In those quiet hours, when night whispers its deepest secrets, the king learned of Mordecai's forgotten act of loyalty. The very same Mordecai who now sat in sackcloth by the city gate. As morning light painted the sky in gentle hues, the king sought counsel on how to honor someone who had served him well. Haman, arriving early to the palace with darker purposes in his heart, was asked how to best honor a person the king wished to celebrate. Thinking the honor must surely be meant for himself, Haman suggested a procession through the city streets with royal robes and the king's own horse. Like leaves turning to reveal their silver undersides before rain, events began to shift in unexpected ways. Haman found himself leading Mordecai through the city streets, proclaiming his honor before all the people. The morning air carried the sound of celebration, while in Haman's heart, worry began to grow like shadows lengthening in late afternoon. At the second banquet, in a garden where roses climbed ancient walls and fountains sang soft songs to the evening air, Esther finally revealed her petition. Her words fell soft yet clear, like petals dropping onto still water, as she shared both her heritage and the threat to her people. The king, his heart moved by love for his queen and anger at the deception, rose from the table like a storm cloud gathering. In those moments when truth emerged like stars appearing at twilight, justice began to unfold. Haman, whose pride had risen as high as the gallows he had built for Mordecai, found himself facing the consequences of his actions. The very trap he had laid became like a net catching its maker, while Mordecai was elevated to a position of honor in the palace. The king's new decree spread through the empire like morning light, chasing away darkness. The Jewish people were granted the right to defend themselves, and what had been planned as a day of sorrow was transformed into a time of joy. Relief flowed through the communities, like spring waters melting from winter mountains. In homes across the empire, lamps burned bright as families celebrated their deliverance. The air was filled with songs of thanksgiving, and tables were laden with festive meals shared among neighbors and friends. This celebration would become known as Purim, a time to remember how sorrow had turned to joy, like night giving way to dawn. Through these events, Esther and Mordecai continued to serve with humility and wisdom, like steadfast stars guiding travelers home. They became beacons of hope and justice throughout the empire. Mordecai worked beside the king, his counsel helping to bring peace and prosperity to all peoples under Persian rule. The gentle strength that had carried him through difficult days now supported many others. Esther remained a queen whose grace touched lives like soft rain, nurturing parched earth. Her story was whispered in mothers' lullabies and shared around evening fires, teaching future generations about courage wrapped in gentleness and strength flowing from faith. She had walked through the valley of decision and emerged carrying light for others to follow. In the years that followed, the Jewish people flourished throughout the empire like gardens tended by careful hands. The celebration of Purim became a sweet reminder that divine care often works through hidden ways, like roots growing deep beneath winter soil. Each year, as families gathered to remember, they shared gifts of food with neighbors and provided for those in need. The palace at Susa stood as it always had, its gardens still flowing down terraced walls. But now its halls held memories of how one person's courage could turn the tide of history. The fountains still sang their endless songs, but their music now seemed to whisper stories of faithfulness rewarded and prayers answered in unexpected ways. Dear listener, Let Esther's story rest gently in your heart. Remember that you too may be placed in your current circumstance for purposes yet unknown, like a seed waiting for its season to bloom. Your position, whatever it may be, holds possibilities for bringing light to others.